Welcome to another episode of Deep Dive into Real Estate by Team Luddy Dillon. This is the place where we simplify real estate for you, one topic at a time. Enjoy.
All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's, it's a bit more complicated than your average fixer-upper. Yeah. We're talking about buying a property in Ontario, and get this, it already has tenants.
Yeah, that's right. It's not as simple as just, seeing a for sale sign and picturing yourself moving right in.
Exactly. There's a whole other layer of complexity when you're dealing with existing tenants. And, we're part of Laddie Dillon's real estate team. We're all about giving you the knowledge you need to make smart choices, whether you're buying, selling, or investing. And in the Peel region, especially Brampton, Caledon, Mississauga, Laddie and his team, they've got you covered.
He's been a real estate pro in the region since 2007.
So he's seen it all.
He really has, especially when it comes to these properties with tenants. You wouldn't believe some of the situations.
I bet. So let's break it down for our listeners. A lot of people think buying a house with tenants is no big deal. You just, buy it and then you move in. But hold on a second. Ontario has some pretty strict laws in place. And those laws are designed to protect tenants' rights.
It's true. You're not just buying a building, you're buying into a whole set of legal obligations.
Yeah, it's more like buying a house with a side of contract negotiations.
Exactly. You're stepping into the previous owner's shoes.
And taking on their responsibilities.
Yep, all of them. So before you even think about changing the locks or picking out paint colors, we need to talk about evictions.
Evictions.
Yeah, it's not as simple as some people might think.
So let's get this straight. You can't just kick out the tenants because you bought the place and you want to move in.
That's a big myth, unfortunately. Eviction in Ontario is a very specific legal process.
There are rules.
There's lots of rules. Okay, so no new owner, new rules kind of thing.
Not a chance. There are a few very specific situations where eviction is actually legal.
Okay, so spill the beans. What are the exceptions?
One of the main ones is what we call personal use eviction.
This means you, the new owner, are planning to use the property as your primary residence.
Gotcha. So if I buy a place and I want to move in myself, that's a legit reason for eviction.
It could be, but even then you have to follow the proper procedures.
It's never easy, is it?
Nope. Even with a legitimate reason for eviction, there are hoops to jump through.
All right, lay it on me. What are the hoops?
First off, you have to give the tenants proper notice.
Notice how much notice are we talking here?
In Ontario, it's 60 days.
60 days?
Yeah, and it can't just be a casual, hey, I'm moving in, see you later kind of notice.
There's paperwork involved, I'm sure.
You bet. You need to use the official form for ending a tenancy and deliver it properly.
Official forms, proper delivery. Okay, I'm taking notes.
Good, because here's the other kicker.
There's more.
Yep. You're also legally required to compensate the tenants with 1 month's rent.
You're kidding me. So even if you're evicting them for a legitimate reason, you still have to pay them.
That's the law in Ontario.
Yeah.
It's designed to help tenants find a new place and cover those moving expenses.
Wow, so it's not a cheap process.
Not at all. And remember, trying to evict tenants just to get new ones in at a higher rent? That's a big no-no.
I've heard about that. That's called bad faith eviction.
Exactly. Right? The LTB can spot that a mile away.
And they won't be happy about it.
Not at all. So it's really important to understand the rules and follow them carefully.
Okay, so we've established that evicting tenants isn't a walk in the park. What about those situations where the tenants aren't on a fixed-term lease? What if it's month to month? Does that give the buyer more flexibility?
It does open up some options, but it's still not a free-for-all.
Oh, really?
Yep. You can actually specify in your offer that you want vacant possession.
Vacant possession sounds kind of official.
It is. It basically means that the seller is responsible for making sure the property is empty when you take ownership.
Oh, so they have to handle all that notice and compensation stuff we just talked about.
Exactly. It takes the pressure off the buyer.
But even with vacant possession, if you want the tenants out, you still have to follow those personal use eviction rules, right?
Absolutely. The same rules apply whether it's a fixed-term lease or month-to-month.
Makes sense. So let's say we decide to keep the tenants. Does that mean we're stuck with their current rent too?
Well, you are bound by the terms of the existing lease, including the rental rate.
So no raising the rent as soon as I become the new landlord?
Not quite. Ontario has a system for rent increases, but they're controlled. There's a specific percentage set by the government each year.
And you can't go above that?
Nope. For 2023, that cap is 2.5%.
Interesting. So rent increases are a bit more complicated than I thought. What about if it's a month-to-month agreement?
In that case, you could try asking the tenants to sign a new lease with a modified rent.
But they don't have to agree, right?
They don't. They could happily keep renting under the same terms they had with the previous owner.
So even with month-to-month, it's not a guaranteed rent increase. Huh. Fascinating. Now, just out of curiosity, are there any, let's say, creative ways to encourage existing tenants to move on?
Well, there's always the option of offering what's known as cash for keys.
Cash for keys. What is that exactly?
Yeah. Basically, it's a financial incentive you offer tenants to encourage them to vacate.
Oh, so like a little moving bonus.
Exactly. You're essentially paying them to leave.
But I'm guessing there are some downsides to that approach, too.
Absolutely. For one thing, you have to weigh the cost of that payout against how much more rent you could potentially get with new tenants.
It's a bit of a gamble, isn't it?
It can be. And there's no guarantee it'll even work. The tenants might take the money and stay put.
Oh, wow.
So you need to weigh the risks and benefits carefully.
This is getting really interesting. All right, so we've covered evictions and rent increases. But what about renovations? Let's say I buy a place and I want to gut it and give it a major makeover. Does that change things at all?
It does. Legally, you can evict tenants for major renovations.
Really?
But there's a pretty big catch.
Okay, hit me with it. What's the catch?
You have to give them a whopping 120 days notice.
120 days.
That's 4 months.
4 months. That's a long time to wait.
It is. And here's the real kicker. Once those renovations are done, the tenant has the right to move back in.
Wait, hold on. They can just come back after all that.
Yep, it's called the right of first refusal. They can reclaim their unit
At the same rent.
at the original rent.
Yep.
You can't charge them more just because you renovated?
Wow, that's something to think about.
Definitely. It's crucial to be aware of this right of first refusal before you start swinging a sledgehammer.
All right, so we've uncovered a lot of legal twists and turns when it comes to buying a property with tenants.
It's a real estate jungle out there.
It sure is. And that's why clear communication and documentation are so important.
Absolutely. We've talked about notices and agreements, but remember, everything needs to be in writing.
You sound like a broken record, but I get it. Paperwork is king.
It really is. Having a clear paper trail can be a lifesaver, especially if a dispute arises.
And speaking of disputes, I think it's time we tackle the beast that is the landlord and tenant board. Ready to dive into that?
Let's do it. The LTB is a whole other world of complexities, but it's essential to understand, especially if you're dealing with tenanted properties.
All right, listeners, stay tuned, because in part 2, we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the landlord and tenant board. It's going to be a wild ride.
Okay, so we're diving headfirst into the landlord and tenant board world. It's, sometimes it can feel like a bit of a black box.
A black box.
Yeah, it's this entity that people talk about, but not everyone really understands how it works.
Right, a lot of mystery surrounding it.
Yeah.
So let's demystify it for our listeners. What exactly is the LTB?
So in Ontario, it's the official body that handles disputes between landlords and tenants.
Ah, so if things go sour between a landlord and a tenant, this is where they end up.
That's right. Either party can file an application if they feel like their rights have been violated.
So it's not just about evictions.
Nope, not at all. It covers a wide range of issues.
Really? Like what?
Well, everything from disagreements over rent increases to repairs that aren't being made to lease violations, you name it. If it's a landlord-tenant issue, the LTB can weigh in.
Sounds like it can get pretty intense.
It can definitely be stressful. But the good news is the LTB is there to provide a fair and impartial process for resolving these conflicts.
Okay, so it's not like the Wild West of real estate.
Not at all. There are rules and procedures in place to ensure that everyone gets a fair hearing.
That's reassuring.
Well,
But let's be honest, nobody wants to end up at the LTB.
absolutely not.
So what's the best way to avoid a hearing in the first place? Any tips?
Well, clear communication is key.
Okay, so talk to each other.
Exactly. Be upfront about your expectations, whether you're the landlord or the tenant, and document everything.
There's that word again, documentation.
I know I sound like a broken record, but trust me, it's crucial.
So why is paperwork so important when it comes to the LTB?
Because the board makes its decisions based on evidence. They want to see proof, not just hear stories.
So it's like building a case.
Exactly. You need to have a solid paper trail to back up your claims.
So no showing up with a shoebox full of random scraps of paper.
Uh-huh. No, definitely not. The more organized you are, the better you can present your case.
Got it. Organization is key. What else should people know?
Well, think about potential witnesses. Would they be willing to testify on your behalf? And familiarize yourself with the LTB process. Their website has a ton of information. including guides and videos that explain how everything works.
So knowledge is power, even in the world of the LTB.
Absolutely. The more you understand the process, the less intimidating it will be.
Great advice.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's say worst case scenario, I find myself facing an LTB hearing.
Okay.
What are some tips for surviving the experience?
First off, don't panic.
Easier said than done, right?
I know it can be nerve-wracking, but remember the LTB is designed to be accessible. It's not like a courtroom drama on TV.
Right.
The key is preparation.
Oh.
Gather all your documentation. Organize it chronologically. Make copies, label everything clearly.
So basically be the opposite of that person with the shoebox.
Exactly. The more organized you are, the smoother the process will be.
Got it. What else?
Well, think about those potential witnesses we talked about. Reach out to them, see if they'd be willing to speak on your behalf. And again, get familiar with the LTB process. Their website is a gold mine of information.
So knowledge is power.
Exactly. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to handle the situation.
Great advice. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about leases, evictions, rent increases, renovations, and now the LTB. It's clear that buying a property with tenants in Ontario is, well, it's not for the faint of heart.
It definitely requires careful consideration.
And that's where expert guidance can be so valuable.
Absolutely.
And speaking of expert guidance, I think it's time to give a shout out to the amazing team behind this wealth of knowledge, Laddie Dillon and his real estate experts.
Yes, they're the best. They live and breathe real estate in the Peel region, helping people navigate these complexities day in and day out.
Laddie himself has been doing this since 2007. He's seen every real estate scenario imaginable, especially in Brampton, Caledon, and Mississauga.
Whether you're buying, selling, or investing, he and his team can provide the insights and advice you need to make smart decisions and avoid costly mistakes.
So before you sign on the dotted line, give Laddie a call at 905-598-0725.
He'll make sure you're well equipped to handle any curveballs that come your way in the world of Ontario real estate.
Okay, folks, we've packed a lot into this episode, but there's still more to come. In Part 3, we'll get practical with some actionable tips for navigating the buying process when tenants are involved. Stay tuned. Okay, so we've explored the legal side of things. We've faced the landlord and tenant board. Now let's get practical. What are some actionable tips for buyers who are considering a property with tenants?
Well, it all starts with being prepared.
Prepared like a Boy Scout.
Exactly. And one of the most important things you can do is conduct thorough due diligence.
Due diligence. That sounds serious.
It is. It's basically about doing your homework.
Okay, so what kind of homework are we talking about?
Well, for starters, don't just glance at the lease agreement. Really dive in. Understand the terms, the length of the tenancy, the rent amount. Every single detail matters.
Right, because that lease is basically a contract we're inheriting.
Exactly. You need to know what you're getting into.
So no skimming the fine print.
Definitely not. And if anything seems unclear, don't hesitate to ask questions.
Who should we be asking those questions to?
The seller or their agent. They should be able to clarify any points that are confusing.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So due diligence on the lease is step one.
Yep. That's a great starting point.
What else should we be thinking about?
Communication is key.
Communication.
Once you become the new owner, reach out to the tenants, introduce yourself, let them know you're aware of the existing lease and that you intend to honor it.
So it's all about building a good relationship from the start.
Exactly. A little courtesy goes a long way. And remember, communication is a two-way street. Be responsive to their concerns and address any maintenance issues promptly.
Okay, so clear and open communication check.
Mm-hmm.
What about repairs? Anything specific buyers should keep in mind when it comes to tenanted properties?
Absolutely. Before you finalize the deal, get a professional home inspection.
A home inspection. Yeah, that's standard practice for any home purchase, right?
It is. But it's especially important with tenanted properties. The inspection will help you identify any existing or potential maintenance issues.
So you don't get any nasty surprises down the road.
Exactly. It's always better to know about those issues up front.
Makes sense. So get that inspection check, and then what?
Well, if there are any repairs needed, be sure to discuss with the seller who will be responsible for the costs.
The age-old question, who's paying?
It's important to have that conversation early on.
So everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. No surprises, no misunderstandings.
All right, we've covered due diligence, communication, inspections. What about the financial side of things? Any tips for navigating the money matters when buying a house with tenants?
Absolutely. Remember, you're not just buying a property, you're also buying an income stream. So it's like a built-in investment.
Precisely. But it's important to be realistic about that income.
What do you mean by that?
Well, factor in the existing rent amount, potential vacancy periods if tenants move out, and of course those maintenance and repair costs we talked about.
So don't just focus on the purchase price. Crunch the numbers and make sure that rental income aligns with your financial goals.
Exactly. And speaking of goals, it's crucial to be clear about what you want to achieve with this property.
What do you mean?
Are you looking for a long-term investment? Do you plan to live there yourself eventually? Having a clear vision will guide your decisions.
Makes sense. So know your goals, do your research, and be prepared for the unexpected.
That's great advice in any real estate transaction.
All right, so to recap our survival guide, we've got due diligence on the lease, clear communication with tenants, a thorough home inspection, and a realistic financial assessment.
Sounds like a solid plan.
And of course, if you're ever feeling lost or overwhelmed, don't hesitate to seek expert advice.
Exactly. There are professionals who can guide you through the process. And speaking of experts, I think it's time for another shout out to Laddie Bowling and his incredible team.
They really are the best.
They've helped countless people navigate the ins and outs of buying and selling properties with tenants, especially here in the Peel region, Brampton, Caledon, Mississauga.
If you're thinking about buying or selling in those areas, give Laddie a call.
His number is 905-598-0725.
He and his team will be happy to answer your questions and provide expert guidance.
All right, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of buying a house with tenants in Ontario.
We've covered a lot of ground.
From legal considerations to practical tips.
Hopefully you're feeling more informed and empowered to make smart decisions.
Remember, knowledge is power in the world of real estate. So stay curious, stay informed, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, happy house hunting.
Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We will be back with something new and something interesting.